So first of all, a very big thank you to the panelists for taking the time to join us. If you'd like to each introduce yourself, what you do and where you work.
Sure. So I'm Adnan Ibrahim. I'm the founder and CEO of Car Throttle. Car Throttle is now the world's largest cross-platform community for car enthusiasts. So we create and distribute engaging car content around the web to our users who are millennial male users. Yeah, that's us.
Neil Richter, CTO of the Rubicon Project, run the engineering team. Also with Bill Simmons, who's in the audience here somewhere, help co-chair the OpenRTB group.
Andrew Casale, CEO of Index Exchange. We're pure play supply focused and we love transparency.
I'm Amir Malik and I'm the programmatic director at Trinity Mirror, which is a large UK-based news publisher, both in the regional and national space.
Cool. So Amir, Adnan, first of all, you must have a multitude of ad tech companies being offered up to you all the time, all offering to increase monetization. How do you keep track of them all?
It's very difficult to keep track of how much ad tech is actually pitched into us. It's like a multi-headed hydra, and they're coming at us in all different angles, which can be healthy, but I think it begs the question about how ad tech is being sold, and mostly like fast food. I think there is ad tech out there that we need to embrace. As a publisher, though, it can be difficult to navigate the right technology to use, and you need to be speaking to the right people and thinking about the execution layer, which is often not the case, and how publishers adopt tech.
Yeah, I think for us it comes down to what our revenue strategy really is. I mean, so for us, potentially a little bit different from the rest of the panel, but we're 80% of our revenue is from branded content, 10% is from programmatic display. So we have a lot of technology available to us, and it's about picking and choosing the right things that work with our own revenue strategy. So whether that's looking from a data point of view about how we can help to segment our audience in a much more interesting way, because we have a lot of first-party on-platform engagement, through to then on the revenue side and with display about how we can focus on increasing those yields as well. So it really boils down to making sure that there are tools for us that we can go out to just to increase revenue, but focusing on the revenue that matters to us as opposed to where the industry's at and monetizing by their standards.
So every publisher has at least one piece of ad tech in play, probably 10, 20 in some cases, but tech companies take a big chunk of the revenue across the value chain and diminish revenue, disintermediate publishers from buyers. And if the role of the exchange is to create liquidity and scale, how does this align with publishers' agenda around quality, context, and scarcity?
I think news publishers, I can't speak for all publishers, are in a very difficult space, because if you look at the diminishing yield and the decline of direct revenues and couple that with the decline of print revenues, we're in a space where we're literally trying to, out of desperation, force the most strongest yield from an open marketplace environment. People still asking, do PMPs work? And I don't think they work very well. So I think for us, it's a generally tough kind of challenge to face. And if you look at what the platforms are offering, I don't believe in a full stack solution. An end-to-end solution doesn't really wash where there are mature market mechanisms, and programmatic is very mature. I think the fundamental issue for publishers is coming to terms with RTB, or open marketplace impressions, because there's no way that the content and the level of investment and the structure that goes into producing quality content can be paid for through, floor prices that we see on OMP. So I would say that I like Tom Shield's unified yield proposition. I think we need a unified data set to tackle RTB at its core and say, actually, this isn't working. Forecasting, publishers know it's very difficult to forecast. Our business is not stable. So we're better off just kind of handing our business sales teams over to Teeds and to Just Premium and people like this that know how to get spend from the agencies, than trying to sell it ourselves when we're forced into an auction environment. So second price auction modeling needs to be reviewed completely, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think for us as well, it's interesting because we operate more as a, I guess, mid-tier publisher from our own website point of view. So for a publisher like us, I guess, between 20 and 40 million impressions per month, we don't necessarily have that scale to go out and be able to invest a lot of time and resource into the kind of things that would potentially only increase yields by 10, 20%, and is that worth the time for us to go out there? So we actually offload a lot of our display work over to a company in the US called the Publisher Desk, who do a great job of managing all of our programmatic stack. But at the same time, we do want perfect competition without having to go to a lot of the middlemen in the market, of which there are numerous, where one of our impressions can basically end up as 23 different auctions inside of something like an app nexus. So we need to be very careful about who we give those impressions over to, and basically limit demand based on differentiated demand, which is why we choose which seats we're on very selectively. So yeah.
Do you guys want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I'd love to. I would say, looking at it from the other side of the equation for a second, marketers are really smart, and marketers want a lot of value for their media dollars, and as a result, they're moving their budgets out of paper contracts and into platforms. Once they reside in platforms, media companies need a route to access those budgets. There is no way. The way of the past is gone, and we believe that there will be a time not too long from now where every dollar will live in a platform. So in that environment, I think you then have the option of starting to look at the way you interact with those platforms. I think historically, a lot of value was placed on the participant at the top. You know, when we talk about the waterfall, we look at it as the privilege of the positional advantage. The positional advantage used to first be afforded to the ad server, subsequent to that, the primary exchange partner, and then anyone thereafter. But we believe the positional advantage was wrong because it created too much comfort on the ad tech side, and it led to business models swelling, whereby margins grew, take rates grew, and as more dollars move into platforms, less of them make their way to media companies.
All good points. I mean, the critical thing about the exchange and what its central function is, I think the essence of your question, is about essentially connecting buyers and sellers together. And then, I think in the future we have to look at it and ask the question of who should be responsible for running the marketplace. Is it the publisher on behalf of themselves and taking that in-house? Some of the points that were raised in the unified auction discussion are very relevant, because what we see is that when header bidding impressions come in, the response from the demand side is actually an entire multiple above, yet the floor expectations are sometimes not rational relative to that demand that's coming in, and it begs the question of what is the role and what's the role of the seller versus the exchange in that situation. The exchange has a difficult job to do to handle all of that volume, especially if floors are not well set relative to demand.
Yeah, there's a massive absence or critical absence of knowledge, I think, in programmatic monetization, and maybe because there's no textbook to go to for publishers to really consult. But at the same time, I think if the solution is to learn how you can squeeze the winning bid CPM a bit harder, it's not going to create the volume of revenue that's necessary to help publishers. You really need to think closely about, header bidding in itself is not, I was hoping it'd be standardized by now, but I think that process is still in, that's great, because what that's done is kind of, I guess, killed the SSPs to a degree, and they've made them even. But we have another problem where the same user is being exposed to multiple SSPs, and the buyer is buying that user and multiple. If we've got 40 million unique users, and then the Guardian have the same, and the Mail Online, well, there's not 100 million people in the UK, so we're just buying the same. If you're a buyer, you're buying the same impression everywhere. And I think header bidding's natural evolution will be to crystallize that buying mechanism, and that will be led by data, and that's why I think unified data sets can really help the publisher, as opposed to trying to tweak auction prices here and there, which is an issue, but not enough to solve the problem.
Yeah, I guess just to add one more point, to respond to Tom's presentation, from our lens, you only need the ad server if there's paper contracts. If every dollar is in a platform, its value ceases to be relevant. So what we believe is the header is a breeding ground for the future in the sense that it is to Neil's point, a publisher-directed market. The publisher has full transparency into what each participant is doing. They also have all the data into what the market's trying to do, and they're in pole position to be able to set things up for their optimal yield. I think historically, a lot of that autonomy was given to ad tech companies, and ad tech companies optimized their margin over pub yield. And I think that's the business model that no longer is going to work.
And given the fact that we're starting to see clean vendors enter the marketplace, which essentially are allowing publishers to provide audits, how do you think this is going to change relationships between publishers and vendors?
Publishers and ad tech vendors?
Yeah.
I would say take rates are going way down. So I think the ad tech companies that will continue to prevail in the ecosystem are the ones that take their fair share and nothing more. I think it's going to be a much better relationship in the sense that as more money makes its way to the publishers will find an equilibrium and hopefully start to grow again. I think we're seeing a lot of smarts going from ad tech companies to pubs. There's a lot of publishers, particularly in the New York market, that have hired ad tech people from SSPs, people from DSPs now work for publishers. A lot of knowledge that wasn't there before is now residing within the media company. We think that's a good thing. We think ad tech shouldn't be the only smart participant in the value exchange between pub and ad tech.
I mean, as markets mature and as any technology matures, I was in the early days of CRM, things change, and business models will slowly evolve as expectations are set and as the participants in the market take back more control over the active operation of the market. Probably one of the most interesting things about ad tech, at least on the sell side, is the fact that the current business models are tied to sort of paid impressions rather than total volume. Which, if you think about it, I mean, the SSP has to pay for the total volume that goes through the system. We still have to pay for those bytes flying across the wire and all that CPU utilization, big data utilization. So I think as these conversations evolve, that'll be one of the ones that comes up as well, is what's the full cost of exposing all of this inventory in every exchange to every buyer multiplied. At some point becomes like the largest waste of bytes. To multiply this stuff, it creates sort of this hall of mirrors effect of this inventory isn't real. You can't even measure which part of it is real because it's all been duplicated.
Well, my response would be there won't be many exchanges. I think there's too many. There's too many players in ad tech in general on the tech side. And unfortunately, they all have duplicative technology teams, engineering costs, commercial costs. And right now, the media company pays for all of it. So they're subsidizing the absolute enormity of ad tech. I think your point is very valid. It is completely unsustainable for so many exchanges to reprocess the same impression each time. So there will be less.
Yeah, I mean, Salesforce won in CRM. There's not many people left.
I think transparency will be very interesting, though, because it's clear to see that there have been liberties that have been taken by ad tech vendors beyond the cost of sending an impression out, where we did an exercise with one of the agencies where we said, look, we're going to create 3 deals and buy against the impression, tell me what you're willing to pay for it, and when it comes through, the net CPM to the publisher is missing revenue. So we don't know what's going on, it's missing money. So I think header bidding will answer that question as well, with the transparency and growth, and challenge some of the moral kind of conundrums that I think ad tech vendors have faced, and crystallize those. I mean, people like Google and Rubicon and many of the big SSPs, they kind of had their day now. And it's like this index exchange to come along and, to really even up the playing field in programmatic, I think, to help drive that level of competition. We have to work with Google, and in fairness, we receive good customer service from Google, but forcing some competition against Google, which I guess is not something they'd advise us to do, has been quite healthy for our yield, and header bidding allows that to happen. But I think, the era of, I think Rubicon and SSPs were kind of ad networks to a degree, historically, maybe 6 months ago. And that's changing now with header bidding as well, because the money that was going out, the costs that are going out, in some instances don't seem to be justified.
I mean, if When you sit in my seat, and especially as, running some of the data science, I mean, publishers are in control of their floors. If SSPs were ad networks, we would take back control of the floors, right? But when a publisher in the system has the ability to set those floors, irrespective of what the demand curves look like, I understand it from the perspective of, publishers want to make the most money possible, but perhaps the most money possible is made as to your earlier point, is reconciling the fact that price expectations may not be rational relative to the data that's put in. You want to make your impressions more valuable, put more data in them, right? That's going to raise prices, raise effectiveness for advertisers, make sure everything's measurable, make sure everything's trackable, the viewability scores are there. Then things become more valuable. Otherwise, it just, the problems of fraud compound those things. So if you look at it, buyers are perhaps stepping back and saying, well, I'm not even sure the authenticity of this stuff, so I'm going to start driving prices down. But if there's mechanisms to ensure the authenticity of the impressions, everything's measurable, everything's viewable, there's trackable, there's good conversion metrics, and you're adding whatever unique data that you have, then price expectations rationalize.
What we say often is that there's a lot more money in the programmatic market than people think. The header is, it's such a funny little term that everyone laughs at, but being in ad tech as long as I have been, nothing has ever grown this fast, and it has for a reason, because people are making more money. And they're making the money that was in the market the entire time. The only problem I have with the floor analogy is the exchange is the only one in the room in the old SSP model that can see the winning bid price and sets the clear price. The clear price is net to pub, but no one, the floor price is net to pub, but no one really knows what the clear price was. And we've heard, just as Amir said, a lot of situations where the buyer paid a lot higher of a fee than the publisher saw. So there is a disconnect there, and there's some obfuscation in that model that is no longer sustainable in the header world.
I think publisher control of programmatic is illusory. The real control, in my opinion, is where the economics lie, and that's with the agencies through to the ad tech. And, we can't really tell what's going on. And we was part of a dinner with Google, with BCG, who had done some research on how to optimize floor prices. And one of the critical points of their research was that we should analyze winning bid CPMs and then appropriate the pricing of our floors. That was great, and I'm sure they paid a lot of money for that research, but we don't actually have that control because you can opt out of winning bid data. And at the time of the dinner, that wasn't even available in the platform anyway. So, publishers don't ask those questions. They're like, great, this was really helpful, but ultimately, our control is quite illusory, and until we can shift the thinking around programmatic, the people that buy our inventory have never done a deal over £5 anyway, right? So our trading incentives mean nothing because the trader is totally disconnected from the head of investment in an agency. So they're just buying what they want, and it's not following through. And to your point about, the data pass through, we're not the ones that pulled all that crap inventory into those platforms. Right, that's you guys selling to whichever long tail publishers, pushing it your way and taking it for the margin. So when you talk about costs on,
we filter.
Yeah, you do, but I'm not talking about you individually. But at the end of the day,
no, he does an excellent job of inventory quality. So do we. I think you're looking for other people.
There are a lot
that's
of.
what everyone else said.
There's a lot of exchanges, and they all have very different standards, and that's a problem in and of itself, because I think to a big media company, it becomes difficult to understand where best to list yourself, because you don't want, you don't want to be Nordstrom's in a bad neighborhood, because no one will come in and buy your stuff, and that's a whole other problem as well, that I think is getting better.
Well, even ad tech, right, you've got the SSP issue, and then you've got the DMP issue, which is a whole nother saga. Because you've got glorified platforms with the biggest license fees ever heard of, that essentially could be built by somebody in their bedroom, the right engineer, right? And it's a whole kind of, I'm sorry to sound so radical about it, but it's a messed up situation. speaking about data, I mean, one of our users, by a little research we did, one of our users, according to Nielsen, Experian, and we had 18 other data validation tools, could be eligible for up to 350 segments being bought at any one time from the buy side. When you hear that, you realize that even that compounds the forecasting situation, that compounds the yield pricing situation. So a unified data set has to be steered from the audience, I think, for publishers, as opposed to from floor pricing and, looking at how you can squeeze the auction environment. We'd like to know who our users are. And they might be people that also read the FT, but read Mirror Sport, for instance. You can buy them for a bit cheaper. But we don't want to give away our inventory to the point where we can't sustain our business.
Let's take the principles of calculus here and take this to its natural limit and say, what does a publisher stack look like at some point in the future? Because right now we're in this sort of hybrid environment, and header bidding is actually creating the necessary conditions for a real conversation around the technology that's there, because it's basically a hack on top of an ad server that's not changing as fast as it needs to. So if the ad tech stack for publishers of the future is, first, the principles, you run your marketplace, you take responsibility for it, you onboard data, you use things like our orders platform to market. I mean, there's a notion that nothing happens until something gets sold, right? Until a salesperson sells something, nothing much happens. So you take that principle, and we reach a logical conclusion where you've got to have a unified approach to data, you've got to have a unified approach to sales and forecasting, you've got to take control of some of the data and offer unique data and not leave it to the third-party data vendors to infer data, saying that 70% of the audience is both male and female at the same time. And you basically take control of pricing. And then at that point, what's actually happening is you're operating the software as a seller, right? Just like if you're operating your Salesforce SaaS solution. Right? So if that's where we want to get, then we should start.
I think we're on our way there. I think even in our conversations with pubs, we are getting tons of requests for bid feeds so that they can understand exactly what each marketer is trying to do with each one of their audiences. They're syncing them to the DMPs so that they can look at the valuations relative to their lens of the audience. And they're investing in data science to try to better reset the way they approach the market. So I think we're speeding toward that. I don't subscribe to the notion that header bidding is a hack anymore. I think it started as a hack, but come on, programmatic used to be a tag in the ad server which loaded 300 milliseconds after the page. So that was the biggest hack of all. This is a platform that sits adjacent to the ad server and speaks to the market before the ad server even has a chance to render. I think this is the breeding ground of the future, and it's programmatic's rightful place on the page. I don't think there's any going back from a model that the publisher controls, particularly when there's this much money on the line.
I mean, if header bidding is a hack, then Google AdWords is the biggest criminal in the world. So it's not, right? So it's smart buying, right? Why should an organization dumb down the way that they acquire media? Because we're all moving decks around on the Titanic. They need to know the best way to ensure performance and make the margins. And we need a real response to that, I think, moving forward.
Good. I'm going to stop you there on that subject because, Adnan, I really want you to talk about what you guys are doing and how it's completely different and how your approach of going in and selling your campaigns to agencies is just completely different and working for you guys.
Yeah, sure. And I think for us, it again boils back down to audience. So because we have high levels of ad blocking, I think IAB back in November released figures to say that both males obviously have higher ad blocking rates than females, and that millennial 18 to 35 males have obviously the highest level of ad blocking. And for us in our position, we have literally the perfect storm, which is millennial males. So we see anywhere from 40 to 50% at the high end of our ad inventory being ad blocked. which potentially could be worrying for a lot of publishers, but for us, obviously, it's about how we can change the way we deliver advertising message to that audience. And so us, like a lot of these new social publishers, we think that the best way to deliver is in the form of content. And so for us, it doesn't matter where that content sits, whether it is on our own platform and site, or whether it's cross-platform. Obviously, Facebook are doing a lot now to be able to give us those metrics when we do tag a piece of branded content as to exactly what its performance is. And I think in the industry, that's potentially the next big hurdle for us, which is performance of branded content. I don't think there are enough tools which really from a 360 point of view look at how well each of those branded pieces of content is performing across platform, because the analytics softwares behind each of those is so different. The data that we get back from each of those platforms is so different. We do a lot of live campaigns on platforms like Snapchat and Instagram, where really the ad APIs are in their infancy or non-existent. So for us, it's about using that branded content message and spreading it out to those users. And then I guess on the data point of view, we touched on it briefly, but developing that first-party data for us is extremely important, because obviously we're getting tagged by a lot of the third-party data networks as well, but our audience have the highest engagements because they're using our platform, because they're logged in, because they are interacting with content as well. And so we can grab all of that data and start to say within automotive, we know their affinity towards certain manufacturers. We know their propensity to purchase vehicles next, which I think is incredibly important. And we then can package that up, and if we're selling it back on site or as branded content, we can use that to effectively increase that engagement with that piece of content.
And for you, which yields the greatest revenue or margin, branded content or your programmatic sales that you do?
I mean, it's easily branded content. I mean, for us, we have our own existing teams, our content teams, but we can drive a lot of margin through branded content purely because we've come from a low-cost background. We know how to engineer and create value out of not very much. I think it's we're venture-backed, and as a venture-backed business, a lot of it has to go back into growth. But we've approached it from a potentially a little bit of a different point of view, where it's about sustainable growth. And I think for a lot of publishers these days, we have to focus on sustainability of our revenues just as much as it is in plummeting our top-line unique growth figures. And we've seen it from the likes of the BuzzFeeds out there that it can be a difficult game to stay ahead of revenue targets, making sure growth is always there, making sure our top-line unique users are always on the up. But if you focused on great user experience and focused on great advertising experience, which I think we are close to, that helps that level of sustainability, which I think is important for publishers in this market.
Rachel, can I do one more question? So just touching on mobile, cross-channel and measurement, because we haven't really dived into that. Device graphs are allowing publishers to create single user IDs across desktop, mobile web and apps to help people better target and manage frequency and attribution. How do you see that working today and developing?
I mean, that's an example, as well as your prior point on, putting all that data on board and developing affinity relationships, right? If this data is going to work for buyers and sellers, then we have to get a lot smarter about it. The current DMP is a bit of a dumb bucket. You put data in it, it's may or may not be attached to an ID with some persistence. It generally is full of Boolean segments. To your comment on, was it hundreds of segments? 300 segments for a given user. You're probably better off thinking about that notion of affinity as the association between a user and some activity or purchase intent or topic as some probability distribution, and then linking it across all of their different devices so that they're getting a unified experience. And then marketers get what they want, which is relevant, effective messaging for those consumers. And that has to be powered by good use of data platforms rather than sort of a dumb bucket approach to DMPs.
I would say, excluding Facebook and Google, our ability to traverse in-app and desktop is completely broken. Each publisher does have some semblance of state, but their graphs individually are quite small. I think we do need a participant to emerge to link them all together. Because I can tell you, like a really basic figure, which I think is pretty telling. If you send a bid request out to a DSP or the market overall with an in-app impression, and you're able to link the desktop cookie, which everyone hates, to that request, it's always worth more. So, death of the cookie, everyone talks about it, but it's actually the more valuable signal today because there's a lot more intent around it. I think as we go forward, there has got to be something emerge to link the two worlds together for the independence, that it's not just the unique position that Google and Facebook have.
Publishers also, this is a real point where they can take the advantage. There's lots of mobile companies like Bliss and Xad, etc. And there's been some speculation about how they collect their data, sniffing exchanges or Long and Lat, etc. I'm not saying that these are the guys that do it, but if they don't own any media assets, then where the heck's the data coming from? So we've got data. We just need to know how to harness that data. Passing Long and Lat out to the exchanges does increase the yield on the bids as well, increase the bid price and the worth and value of that impression. And I think it's an opportunity for media owners to really take advantage of it if they can kind of tackle that data conundrum and bring it in-house.
Anyone want to say anything to end?
I want to talk about the header bidding. So just think about this one concept. When we're putting JavaScript on a page that is running on a heterogeneous network of people's laptops and mobile devices in this room, JavaScript is not a server-side language until recently. That was Java and C++, where you can control the infrastructure, you can control the timing. It's built to handle that sort of I/O level load. With header bidding, what's happening is we're offloading the computational cost of running RTB onto the user's mobile device, their CPU, their battery life, and their data plan. And you can't control latency very well, so it's a hack from an engineering sense that it has to stop at some point and go back on the server. And that'll happen when we have an ad server that supports holistic yield and publishers adopt it. Until then, what we're doing is adding value by letting every impression be exposed to programmatic. And when they have data and there's more users per day, they are more valuable. But that hack point is the fact that the burden is being shifted onto the user's device. And we're depending upon this race to get the key value pairs in before the GPT tag says it's time to fire. Right? So it's not the best computational mechanism to hook demand into supply.
Yeah, but it's the most pure, and that's why it's growing so fast. If you look at any real marketplace, you should be able to participate in a market without fear of another participant having some sort of an advantage. I would say, to your point, there won't be many headers. It's going to be a very small number of them. I'll also say the cost of the ad server today dwarfs the best header implementations, which means the ad server itself, which we've never really attacked from a latency perspective, is really slow. So the standard that we're held to in header is incredibly high relative to the lack of any standard that the ad server is held to. I believe that there will be headers forever. There won't be many, and they'll be really fast, and faster than the ad server ever was. And we'll see who's right.
Publishers are
Competition is good that way.
Publishers are willing to put that script on that page rather than if users want to read our content, or they can just see a big ugly BFG, right, or big BFA, big fucking ad, right? So if you don't want to see that, then you got to deal with the computational costs of whatever the heck it is. I mean, if we don't do that, then you just allow Google to oversee the entirety of our inventory in the ad server.
You actually have to just get a new ad server that works the way that you want.
There's not going to be a new ad server.
Yeah, I mean, Google pretty much.
No one's going to switch ad servers. That train has left the station.
Come on, guys, we got to give it to Google here. Yeah, they won there. So.
Okay, on that note, let's just stop. We'll pick this up as a Q&A later. Thank you.